People who are/were diagnosed with a terminal illness. What made you think something isn't right with me? I woke up with a tennis ball-sized dark purple bruise on my left upper arm. No pain, no swelling. When I finally went to check, my blood work came out as catastrophic. 5,000 thrombocytes, aka platelets. The healthy range is 150 to 400,000. Leukemia was suspected. After a lot of tests, including 2 lovely spinal taps, it turned out I had aplastic anemia, where the bone marrow is attacked by the immune system and stops producing blood cells. It was a relief to find out I didn't have leukemia, until I was told the mortality rate for what I had was higher. This was about 6 months before my 30th birthday. Today, I am 52 and fully recovered for 20 years. Oh, I'm so glad we're starting out with a happy one here. Congratulations, OP, on your recovery. That's amazing. I am not so hopeful for the future stories, but let's see. Story 2. When I was 12, I started fainting in the shower at normal temperatures, and by 15, I had dislocated the same shoulder over 100 times. I couldn't play with kids my age, and I thought I was lazy, until I was about 17 when a coach who did physical therapy as his real job said that pain that prevents someone from holding a backpack is abnormal. I need to go to the doctor. Turns out my body is eating my soft tissue and my heart. I'll eventually die from organ failure or blood vessel collapse or heart failure. I am 21, and now I can't consistently eat without throwing it all back up, and it's painful. Have severe chronic pain in all my joints and have dislocated every joint including ribs and spine. My vision is going out. I can't always walk or grip things. I'm dying, but only as fast as my body eats itself. Edit. I have a rare degenerative condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, as well as an undiagnosed digestive disorder. Undiagnosed due to absurd symptoms that my doctor hasn't fully understood. I love you all. Thank you for your support. If you want to know how to help, please be kind to those you encounter with invisible illnesses. Never assume someone is faking a disability for the accommodation perks. Disabled parking pass, service dog, school and work accommodations, just because you can't see what's hurting them. Story 3. Not terminal, but I felt off for a couple of months. I thought maybe it was college burnout. I couldn't lose weight even though I was working out every day. I would get lightheaded just walking around or standing at work. I told my parents, and they said when I come home from break, I should set up an appointment with the doctor. 1 week later, I was out with friends and my chest started burning. It was like acid reflux or heartburn. But it started to get rapidly worse over 3 hours, and I ended up in the ER with the pain in my chest. It turns out there was a basketball-sized tumor growing on my liver. Story 4. Survivor of a potentially terminal cancer here. Rare and very aggressive, poorly understood and low survival rate. I would wake up in the middle of the night in severe pain. I would take painkillers, I used topical painkilling creams, ice, heat, massage, etc. Nothing had any effect. I had to wait out the pain and eventually it would go away. It would also happen at random during the day, but nighttime was a guarantee. Best of all, my doctor refused to do additional testing beyond an x-ray despite my pleading. Another doctor said there was nothing wrong with me after misreading an MRI, and dismissed my claims as an addiction to painkillers despite me specifically saying I wanted more testing, not more painkillers, because they don't work. Moral of the story, make noise. Lots and lots of noise. When treatment isn't working and you know something is wrong with your body, make noise. I was eventually diagnosed when an acquaintance connected me with a doctor that investigated thoroughly. He almost gave up on me because my symptoms were not indicative of anything in particular, but he took a risk on another MRI. Thanks, healthcare system that encourages doctors to not test. And it paid off, as the tumor had grown to a large size by then and couldn't be missed. Story 5. Before my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, he kept telling me he had a severe shortness of breath. He was originally diagnosed with emphysema, so it was kind of to be expected, but not that bad. He was a self-employed mechanic. He had to plow and shovel his own lot, and he started to not physically be able to do his work in the cold. Then the fatigue hit. The strongest man I knew couldn't even be bothered to go outside. He loved food and always ate out, and then his appetite went away. Lastly, his memory started fading fast. He forgot it was my birthday and he was too tired to go out. I think that's my hardest memory of his last few months. All of that happened before his official diagnosis. I think a mixture of depression and denial caused him to keep pushing back the doctor's visit, even though he knew something was terribly wrong. He denied treatment, and and he died within 2 months of the diagnosis. I think he would still be alive today if he asked for a second opinion about the emphysema, because I think it was the beginning stages of the cancer and was misdiagnosed. Story 6. In 2012, my then 41-year-old wife was successfully, so we thought, treated for breast cancer. She discovered the cancer in the typical way. She had a lumpectomy, chemo, radiation, and we went about our lives. Sometime in spring 2016, she started complaining about being tired all the time, and that there was something wrong with her gut, especially when she had bowel movements. Then there was an instance where she swore some guy tried to run her off the road, which made no sense. The last thing should have been the sign that something was seriously wrong, but she didn't follow up on it. Originally, she put the exhaustion to working too much. She had opened her own law firm in late 14 and got issues due to bad eating. She looked fine. Finally, she went to her GP, who sent her straight to the ER. Turned out the cancer had metastasized to her liver. Automatic stage 4. She made it another 44 weeks. On her last oncologist visit, I was sitting next to an elderly woman recovering from stomach cancer in the waiting room, and her friend. They saw my wife limping off to get her blood taken and noted my wife was not one who was lucky as her. It wasn't in malice, but I knew we were going to get bad news. The doc gave her 2 to 5 months. She died 10 days later, when her cancer, once again, overachieved. She was weakening and in pain her last few months, but was still doing things until about her final week. She spent most of that time sleeping and watching TV. Her last night at home, our 20th wedding anniversary, ironically, she woke up in the middle of the night completely delusional. Her liver had basically stopped clearing the toxins out of her blood. Probably the same thing that happened when she thought she was going to be run off the road, and she didn't know what was going on, who I was, etc. She put up one hell of a fight with EMS. Didn't know she still had that much energy. She came back to her senses in the hospital in the middle of the day, long enough for our children to get there before she went to sleep in hospice care and passed about 36 hours later. 9 months later, and it's still hard to believe sometimes. OP and anyone listening who has experienced this kind of loss, or any loss really, I truly am. I don't want to say I'm sorry, because I don't know. It means nothing. Everyone says it, but I don't know. My heart goes out to you. You have all the sympathy I could possibly give. Watching a loved one who is incredibly dear to you deteriorate in front of your eyes is something I wish for no one. Story 7. When I was 13, I started sleeping a lot. My parents thought it was hormones and being a typical teenager who was growing a lot, going through a lot of changes, studying hard, needing the recuperation or rest. But it started to get worse, and it was as if they didn't see me anymore because I was constantly sleeping. For example, my weekdays were going to school, coming home, and immediately going to sleep. They would wake me up for dinner, sometimes I would eat and do homework simultaneously, and then go straight back to bed. Sometimes I didn't get up at all, though. I'd sleep right through until morning. On weekends, I wouldn't wake up until 2 p.m. I'd eat, try reading a little bit, but I would take naps 2 hours later. I would wake up for supper and soon go straight back to bed. I was literally sleeping my life away. Then I started to notice that I couldn't move any of my toes except my big toes. Some of my neighbor toes would move with the big toe, but I had no control of them at all. My pinky toes just stick right out with no movement at all. Try as I might, I was and still am basically paralyzed in all of my toes except for the big ones. I also started stumbling a lot, running into walls, dropping things all the time. My short-term memory became really bad. I was forgetting everything, and my ability to understand simple instructions became increasingly difficult. I was constantly getting sores in my mouth and on my tongue like I was biting my cheek or tongue all the time in my sleep. The corners of my mouth started to split like paper cuts. I started getting short of breath and I would wake up with this deep ache in my back that felt like someone kicked me between the shoulder blades. The ache went straight through into my chest. I also started feeling like my heart was sometimes skipping a beat or triple beating, and when I would wake up at any time, it physically hurt my eyes to open them. They felt heavy and painful. When I finally got to the doctor, I described it as how I would imagine waking up from a coma felt like something is pulling you back into sleep, and how it was so painful just to open my eyes. I felt drugged. I remember the doctor giving me a physical exam, focusing a lot on my tongue, toes, legs, and gait. I remember her thwacking my knees every which way, and at first giggling at how hard it was to get my reflex to kick. She had 2 doctors come in to try, and they all kept tapping my knees all over and lightheartedly saying my legs were being stubborn. The head doctor came in and tried only a few times before he stopped. He asked me to stand up and touch my toes. He ran his fingers up and down my spine a few times to show the other doctors. He then asked me to walk back and forth again. He asked me to try to stand on one foot and rub my heel up and down against my shin from knee to ankle. This was surprisingly very difficult for me to do. He asked me to close my eyes and try to stand still, and I was really surprised at him catching me as I fell over. Then he ordered an immediate blood test. He comforted me and said everything was going to be okay, and he will let me know my test results immediately. In the meantime, he gave my mom instructions, I don't know what, and a few days later he called and scheduled me for an emergency appointment that day. He asked if I was vegetarian. I said, no, I ate meat constantly. He then told me that he had personally never encountered a person as young as I with B12 levels so low. He said that typically he sees low levels like this in elderly in hospice. He said he spoke to some specialists and determined that I was born with pernicious anemia. I needed B12 injections immediately and once a week for 8 weeks and then once a month for life. Because I was young, it wasn't fully explained to me how serious this was, nor did I understand what the word pernicious meant. That's another long story. But anyway, I have some permanent damage as a result, but I'm grateful that in today's world, I can stay alive thanks to B12 injections. I bet OP's parents are so scared when they hear about any kid sleeping a lot now. It's one of those things that you would never expect to be a sign of something bigger, right? And then in the end, it was, but there was really very little way to know. It was excessive sleeping to be sure, but it's a teenager. Sometimes they do that. I'm glad OP got the diagnosis and the treatment they needed. A life of being constantly tired and, just not being able to move things properly. Like, losing your ability to move your toes, that's so weird and specific, but I feel like it would bother me a lot. I don't know, it sucks, but I'm glad they caught it in time, OP. Story 8. My mom had terminal cancer, and when I came back from a work trip, I took one look at her and said, "You're going to the hospital." She had lost weight and looked ashen. We argued about it, but the next day she went because she could barely breathe. Turns out she had pneumonia and would have died within days if she hadn't gone to get treatment. It was when they took the x-rays that they found some other stuff around her lungs that made them look deeper. They found SCLC. Without finding it, she might have a few months, but she chose chemo and lived a year after diagnosis. Story 9. Not a terminal illness, but a lifelong disability that will always require treatment. I got diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy in January 2017 due to a vascular malformation in my right frontal lobe. It was a lifelong process to get diagnosed because the types of seizures I had growing up were focal, meaning they didn't present like most of the seizures we see in films. Some of my earliest memories were of seizures. It would feel like my body got locked up, but my brain was still awake. But I couldn't explain what was happening to me at such a young age. My parents brushed it off as a panic attack or nausea. It wasn't until graduate school where my body finally broke down and I had my first tonic-clonic seizure, losing consciousness, spasms, like you see on TV. After waking up from the seizure, I thought I had fainted briefly and was ready to put it out of my mind. Luckily, my boyfriend was there at the time and had the sense to call an ambulance. After an EEG and MRI, they were able to find the mass that I've likely had all of my life. Looking back, I definitely should have known something major was wrong, but each symptom alone seemed relatively harmless. Some of the more obvious warning signs were daily vomit spells, frequently getting in trouble as a child for daydreaming, losing time where your body continues whatever task you're working on but your brain is essentially asleep for a few minutes and sometimes hours, frequent night terrors and sleepwalking, intermittent deafening throbbing sounds, and heavy pressure in your ears that persists for hours or even days. My advice? If you or your child has sleep, behavioral, or digestive issues, see a doctor and be persistent. Had I gotten treatment as a child, my symptoms would have never progressed to where they are now that I'm 23. OP, for what it's worth, I am also glad your boyfriend was there when it happened. If you really thought it was just a fainting spell and you got back up and just moved about your day, that would have been not great, but also a perfectly reasonable reaction too. Maybe you'd mention it in a checkup or something, like ideally you would, but maybe you'd forget. But fainting just one time isn't super noteworthy, but having someone there who was like, yeah, you had a seizure, may have ended up saving you a lot more. The brain is scary, man. Epilepsy is even scarier, especially the first kind of seizures that OP mentioned. Just having your body lock up, but you're still conscious and everything, but you can't explain what you're feeling because you're young. That sounds horrible. Anyway, glad it's diagnosed now at the very least. Story 10. I used to love baseball back in high school. I was the starting pitcher for my team. I trained excessively to become better, and hey, I was actually pretty good. Had dreams of going pro. One thing that always felt off was how much pain I would feel in my shoulder after a game. Anytime I pushed myself really hard, it felt like I was doing something my body really wasn't supposed to do. Coaches and teammates all told me it was normal, I probably have a low pain tolerance, called me a wimp and so on. In a joking way, we all laughed. Cut to the last pitch I would ever throw. It was a regular game, not some movie-esque final inning against the rival school during a championship. Just an exhibition, basically a warm-up. They had this really athletic kid, an absolute unit, as they say, and he was a lefty. I'm right-handed. Typically, this matchup gives the batter an edge. I know he's going to give me trouble, so I decide to try and get him out of the way ASAP. Fastball, I was kind of known for this. I would throw people off with how fast I could fire him out. For whatever reason, I decided I want to show off and put everything I had into this one. Stance, leg lift, lunge, and then everything goes red for me. I dislocated my shoulder, which isn't too uncommon for a pitcher, but this felt different. My shoulders popped back into place, but I'm still in agonizing pain. Definitely the worst pain I've ever felt in my life before or since. I was pulled from the game and eventually taken to the doctor to get checked out. They decided to give me an MRI. I don't remember why MRI instead of X-ray. And they find it. Turns out all along I had a bone tumor, which was the reason I was in so much pain after a game. It was just under the joint and had been scraping up against everything. Nerves, muscles, the whole shebang. During the process of dislocating my shoulder, somehow the tumor must have hit something so hard it broke. Docs were all baffled as to how I played with that thing in the spot it was in. But yeah, afterwards, no more baseball. Dreams of going pro went down the toilet and I just had to move on. That took a long time. Having your dreams crushed by something out of your control, it's not a great feeling. Also, I don't know if I've ever heard of a bone tumor before. Admittedly, I'm not a doctor or anything, so it's not like, I've never heard of this before in some kind of educated sciencey way. No, more in like a layman, I don't know much kind of way. But maybe playing baseball was kind of good in a way. Like, maybe you wouldn't have found the tumor until way later if you hadn't pushed it so hard. I don't know, maybe that's not true. I shouldn't say anything about medical stuff. Seriously, though, OP, I'm sorry you had your dreams taken away from you. I am glad, however, that they found what was wrong with you. Story 11. Early December 2017. My dad was rapidly forgetting things. My mom asked for a drink and he brought her an empty glass, or would forget where he put his keys. At first, we thought he was just getting older. I mean, he's 66. Then, one day at work, he stood in the hall confused and not knowing how to do his job of 45 years. So, coworkers took him to the ER, who told him he was just stressed and to go home and rest. Within a few days, he had aphasia and couldn't recall words even though he understood what we were saying to him. 2 weeks after the ER visit, an urgent care doctor said it could be a stroke. He started obsessing over certain items, like holding a coaster and setting it down just to pick it up again. He would have hallucinations, holding his hands under the running faucet, trying to rub off his skin, saying it was boiling, even though the cold water was running. The following week, he became a frail old man who couldn't walk on his own, couldn't get himself dressed, couldn't feed himself. January 8th, 2018. 1 month after his ER visit, he died in a long-term care facility. Spinal tap results and autopsy of his brain concluded an extremely rare degenerative brain disorder, sporadic Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Basically, he wasn't acting like himself, and we knew something was wrong, but there are no tests, no treatments, and no cures for CJD. We had to watch this fast-acting dementia take my dad over the course of a month before we could even have answers. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to end it on this one. As I said before in this thread, watching a loved one just deteriorate in front of you is a fate I would never wish on anyone. This sounds like one of the most heartbreaking things I could ever experience. Or anyone can ever experience, I mean. I don't really want to ruin the kind of feeling or mood of the video with anything, so I don't have much to say. But I do truly hope that you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.